Shattered vows. The night everything changed. Marriage isn't supposed to feel like this. I used to think love was a solid thing, something you could build your life on, like a house with deep roots in the earth. But lately, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. A slow, subtle movement at first, like the barely perceptible sway of a tree in the wind. And then, over time, the cracks started forming. It wasn't always this way. 12 years ago, when I first married Vanessa, we had something real, something steady. Ours wasn't the kind of relationship that burned fast and bright like a shooting star. It was a slow fire, warm and dependable. We built a life on that fire. A home, 2 kids, a routine. And for a long time, it was enough. But now I wasn't so sure. Lately, Vanessa had been different. It started with the little things. A distracted look in her eyes when we talked. The way her phone never left her hand. The way she turned the screen away from me when I walked into the room. The way she sighed, like everything I said was just another weight pressing down on her shoulders. At first, I told myself it was stress. She'd been working more, taking on bigger projects. She was tired, overwhelmed. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But doubt is like water seeping into a crack. Once it's in, it only takes time for the whole thing to break apart. Then, there was the name. Derek. It started small, just a mention here and there. Nothing that should have meant anything. Oh, Derek had the funniest idea today. Derek thinks we should approach the project this way instead. Derek says I should take more time for myself. At first, I barely noticed it. A coworker, a friend, someone she spent long hours at the office with. But it was the way she said his name. There was an energy in it, a flicker of something beneath the surface, something she didn't even realize was there, a kind of lightness. I started watching her more closely. The way she smiled at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she lingered before answering my calls. The way she would come home late, sighing, saying, "Ugh, another long meeting with Derek." And that sick feeling in my gut started to grow. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to test something. I waited until she was settled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, wrapped up in whatever private world existed on that screen. Then, I sat next to her, close, the way I used to. She barely reacted. I reached out, trailing my fingers over her arm. She flinched, so small, so quick that she probably thought I wouldn't notice. I noticed. "Hey," I said softly. "Everything okay?" She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." MMM. She glanced at her phone again. A message popped up, a name at the top of the screen. Derek. She tilted the phone away before I could read it. That's when I knew. It wasn't proof. Not yet. Not the kind you could point at and say, "See, here it is." But I'd felt the shift, the quiet withdrawal, the way she was here but not here. I had spent years learning the rhythms of my wife, how she breathed when she slept, how she curled her fingers when she was deep in thought, how she laughed when she was truly, truly happy. I knew when something was wrong, and something was very, very wrong. That night, as I lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt it. The space between us. It wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something colder. An invisible wall built between us, brick by brick, in late-night text messages and stolen glances and secrets I wasn't supposed to see. She turned over, her back to me. And I wondered, when had it started? When had she stopped choosing me? I closed my eyes, but I knew sleep wouldn't come. Because a part of me already understood. This wasn't just a bad day. This was the beginning of the end. Something was wrong. I felt it in the way Vanessa avoided my eyes when she spoke to me. In the way her laugh, once effortless and bright, now came in measured doses. Always a little forced when I was around, but natural, unrestrained when she was looking at her phone. The signs were there, small at first. She started dressing differently. Not drastically, but enough for me to notice. Clothes that hug her figure a little more, heels she hadn't worn in years, A subtle shift in perfume from the warm vanilla I loved to something sharper, muskier. New perfume. I asked one evening as she walked past me, the scent lingering in the air. She hesitated just a second too long. Yeah, just want to change. A change. That word stuck in my mind like a splinter. The overtime at work became a routine. I swear, this project is going to kill me, she sighed one night as she slid into bed beside me, pulling the covers tight around her body like a shield. Derek keeping you busy? I asked, forcing a casual tone. She went still for half a second. Not long enough for someone who wasn't looking to notice. But I noticed. She exhaled, shifting onto her side. Daniel, come on. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just asking. She groaned, rubbing her temples. I told you, he's just my coworker. He's my boss for this project. That's it. I swallowed hard, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But doubt has a way of burrowing under your skin, whispering in your ear at night. And the whispers were growing louder. It wasn't just me. The kids felt it too. Mom, are you coming to my school play tomorrow? Chloe asked over dinner, her big brown eyes full of hope. Vanessa barely looked up from her phone. I'll try, sweetie, but I have a late meeting. Liam scoffed, stabbing his fork into his mashed potatoes. With Derek. Vanessa's head snapped up. Excuse me? Liam met her gaze without flinching. You're always working, Mom. It's like you don't have time for us anymore. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I expected Vanessa to soften, to reach for his hand, to reassure him that he was wrong. But instead, she sighed, setting her phone down just long enough to rub her temples. I'm doing the best I can, Liam, she said, her voice tight with frustration. You don't understand how stressful my job is. No, Liam shot back. I guess I don't. He pushed his plate away and stormed off. Vanessa exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Great. Now I'm a bad guy. I clenched my jaw. He's just a kid, Vanessa. He misses you. Her eyes flashed with something unreadable. And what about you, Daniel? Do you miss me, or do you just miss controlling me? Her words hit like a slap. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She stood up, grabbing her plate. I don't want to do this right now. And just like that, she was gone. I sat there in the empty dining room, the weight of her absence heavier than ever. That night, I heard her laughing softly in the dark. I turned over, my heart pounding. She was lying on her side, facing away from me, the soft glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. A message came in. I wasn't the kind of man to pry. I had never been, but something deep inside me twisted, screaming at me to look. So I did. The screen was tilted just enough for me to see the name at the top. Derek. And beneath it, a message. Wish you were here. She smiled. She smiled. And in that moment, something inside me shattered. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know I saw, but I did. I turned onto my back, staring at the ceiling, my chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. I could pretend I didn't see it. I could roll over and convince myself that everything was fine. But the truth was a bitter pill. She was slipping away, and I didn't know if I could stop it. The moment I stepped into the venue, I felt it, the subtle shift in energy, the unspoken tension thick in the air. The company party was held at an upscale rooftop lounge, all floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek modern furniture, with a view of the city that should have been breathtaking. But I wasn't looking at the skyline. I was looking at them. Vanessa had insisted I come. It'll be good for you to meet my coworkers, she'd said. Maybe then you'll realize you're being ridiculous. Maybe she thought that seeing Derek in person would erase my suspicions, that I'd watch them interact and suddenly feel foolish for doubting her. But the second I laid eyes on him, I knew I hadn't been imagining things. Derek stood with a drink in hand, wearing a navy suit that fit just a little too well, his dark hair neatly styled like he didn't have a single out-of-place thought in his head. He had that effortless confidence, the kind that wasn't loud or showy, but simply there filling up space. And Vanessa, she was glowing. Not in the way she did when we used to dance in our kitchen, laughing as I spun her around. Not in the way she did when she cradled our newborn son for the first time. This was different. Her dress was deep red, hugging her figure in a way that made heads turn. But she wasn't looking at anyone else. Just him. They stood close. Closer than colleagues should. The kind of closeness that wasn't accidental. It was intimate, electric. The way her body subtly leaned toward him, the way she tilted her head when he spoke, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. The way he murmured something in her ear, and she laughed, really laughed. It wasn't the polite, obligatory chuckle she gave me when I told a joke she'd heard 100 times before. No, this was a laugh that made her eyes shine. A laugh that meant something. My chest tightened. I forced my feet to move, wading through the sea of people, past men in stiff collars and women in designer heels, all chatting about promotions and office politics. The whole room blurred together, except for them. Vanessa saw me before Derek did. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. "Daniel," she said, a little too brightly, stepping toward me. "You made it." "Of course," I said, my voice even, though I could barely hear it over the roar in my ears. Derek turned then, finally acknowledging me. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he extended a hand. "Daniel," he said smoothly, "nice to finally meet you. Vanessa talks about you all the time." "I bet she does." I shook his hand, firm and deliberate, squeezing just hard enough to test him. He didn't flinch, just smiled. Smug. Arrogant. Like he knew something I didn't. Vanessa touched my arm lightly. "Come, let's grab a drink." I let her lead me away, but I could feel Derek's eyes on my back. The rest of the night passed in a blur of forced conversations and fake smiles. Vanessa introduced me to her coworkers, but I barely registered their names. My focus kept drifting back to Derek. The way he moved through the crowd like he owned the place. The way he and Vanessa kept exchanging glances. The way she kept checking her phone. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I pulled her aside, away from the noise. "What the hell is going on with you and Derek?" Vanessa stiffened. "Nothing, Daniel." "Nothing." I let out a bitter laugh. "You barely looked at me all night, but him? You can't take your eyes off him." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Not this again." "Yes, this again." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Tell me the truth. Are you sleeping with him?" Her eyes snapped to mine. For a moment, I thought she'd deny it. Swear up and down that I was wrong, that she loved me, that I was imagining things. But she didn't. She hesitated, just long enough for the knife to twist. I exhaled sharply, stepping back. "Wow." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You're being paranoid." "No." My voice was quieter now. "I'm being replaced." She flinched, just a flicker of guilt. Then it was gone. She looked away. "I can't do this right now." And just like that, she walked off. Back to him. And I stood there, staring after her, feeling the walls of my marriage crack around me. It started with small intrusions. A name lingering too long in conversations. A laugh that didn't belong to me. A shadow creeping into the spaces Vanessa and I once filled together. Then, one evening, the shadow walked through my front door. Derek. It was a Thursday night, the kind of night that used to belong to just us. The kids finishing homework, Vanessa and I unwinding on the couch, the quiet hum of domestic life wrapping around us like a warm blanket. But that peace had already begun unraveling. I heard the knock at the door, and something in me tensed. Vanessa moved before I could, brushing past me with too much eagerness. When she opened the door, her smile was wide, too wide. Derek stood there, holding a paper bag, his confidence so effortless it made my teeth clench. "Figured I'd bring dinner," he said, stepping inside without being asked. Like he belonged. I didn't move from where I stood in the living room, arms crossed, watching. He met my eyes, and there was something in his expression, something smug, something knowing. Vanessa took the bag from his hands, laughing in that easy way she used to laugh with me. Derek, we didn't have to do that. Of course I did, he said smoothly. You've been working so hard lately. Thought I'd take one thing off your plate. His eyes flicked toward me as he said it. The message was clear. I take care of her now. I swallowed down the burning anger rising in my chest. My kids sat at the dining table, watching the exchange with careful eyes. Chloe, only 9 but perceptive beyond her years, kept glancing at me like she was waiting for something to explode. Liam, 13 and already taller than Vanessa, had his jaw clenched tight. He hated Derek. That much was clear. I forced my voice to stay steady. We already ate. Derek turned to me, cocking his head like he was amused. Oh, well, more for Vanessa then. He moved to the kitchen like it was his house, like I was just some inconvenient presence taking up space. Vanessa didn't even glance at me as she followed him. I stood there, gripping the back of a chair so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't normal. This wasn't work. This was something else entirely. Derek laughed at something Vanessa said. Liam muttered under his breath, "He's such an asshole." I exhaled slowly. "Watch your mouth." Even though I agreed. Chloe, in that small, uncertain voice of hers, whispered, "Daddy, why is he always here?" The words sliced through me. Why was he always here? I didn't go to the kitchen. I wasn't going to play their game, wasn't going to sit at the table and pretend everything was fine while another man made himself comfortable in my home. Instead, I went to the garage, gripping the workbench so tightly my arms ached. I had spent years building this life. A home, a family, a marriage. I had poured love into every corner of it, believing that if I just worked hard enough, held on tight enough, it would last. But now, there was a stranger in my kitchen, eating my food, laughing with my wife. And she was letting him. No, she was welcoming him. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing, clenching, unclenching. But eventually, I heard footsteps behind me. Liam. He leaned against the doorframe, hands stuffed in his hoodie pockets, looking older than 13, looking like he understood. You're going to let this keep happening? His voice was low, careful. I exhaled through my nose. I don't know what you mean. Liam scoffed. Yeah, you do. He paused, then said, you should tell him to leave. I looked at my son, then really looked at him. He was waiting for me to stand up, to be the father he needed, to stop pretending. I nodded once. Then I walked back inside. Derek was still there, sitting at my dining table, his arm resting casually over the back of Vanessa's chair. Too comfortable, too familiar. Vanessa turned when I entered, her smile dropping slightly. She could see it in my eyes. Enough. I walked up to Derek, standing over him. It's late. My voice was quiet but firm. You should go. Derek didn't move, didn't even flinch. He just sat there, smirking up at me. Relax, man. We were just finishing dinner. This isn't a request. Something in my tone must have finally registered because the smirk faded. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. You don't have to act all territorial, Daniel. We're just friends. Vanessa stood up then, her expression tight. Daniel. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at him. Derek stood slowly, pushing his chair back. He was trying to hold on his confidence, but I saw the shift in his posture. He wasn't as sure anymore. All right, he said lightly. I'll go. He turned to Vanessa, dropping his voice just enough that he thought I wouldn't hear. I'll see you tomorrow. And with that, he walked out the door. I turned to Vanessa. She was furious. What the hell was that? She snapped. I took a slow breath, measuring my words carefully. That was me setting a boundary. She folded her arms, shaking her head. You embarrassed me. I let out a dry laugh. I embarrassed you? I gestured toward the door. Do you even hear yourself? She didn't answer. She just turned away, grabbing plates off the table with more force than necessary. I stood there, watching her, feeling something inside me crack. This wasn't just about Derek. This was about us, or what was left of us. And for the first time, I wasn't sure there was anything left at all. There's a moment when you realize you've been fooling yourself, that the cracks you've been desperately trying to patch are too deep, too wide, that the thing you've been trying to save is already gone. For me, that moment came on a cold Wednesday night in my own home with my children watching. And it started with Derek's laughter. Dinner was over, plates scraped clean, the kids had already retreated to their rooms, and Vanessa was clearing the table. I had hoped, prayed, that tonight would be different. That Derek wouldn't show up like he always did, easing his way into my house, my family, my life. But of course he did. I heard the knock, and before I could react, Vanessa was already at the door. She didn't hesitate, didn't check who it was, she knew. And that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Derek stepped inside like he belonged there, carrying his signature arrogance and a six-pack of beer. He grinned at Vanessa before glancing at me. "Evening, Daniel," he said smoothly, shutting the door behind him. I clenched my jaw. Evening? Like this was normal? Like this was his place, too? Vanessa didn't even look at me. She took one of the beers from him, popped it open, and took a sip. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Didn't realize we were expecting company. Derek smirked, cracking open his own beer. Didn't realize I needed an invite. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. "You do." A tense silence settled between us, the kind that made the air feel thick, heavy. Vanessa sighed. "Can we not do this tonight?" I stared at her. "Do what, Vanessa?" She gave me a tired look, like I was the one ruining the evening. "This whole territorial thing. He's my coworker. We're just hanging out. Hanging out. In my house. Drinking my beer. Sitting at my table." I let out a slow breath. "It's late." Derek leaned back, stretching like he had all the time in the world. "It's barely 9. I was seconds away from snapping, from telling him exactly where he could shove that smug expression, when something unexpected happened. Liam walked into the room. "Mom, can you help me with?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Derek. His face twisted into something I hadn't seen before. Disgust. "Why is he here?" Liam asked, his voice sharp. Vanessa frowned. "Liam, don't be rude." But my son wasn't backing down. He looked right at me, then at Derek, and then, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, his eyes widened. And I realized he knew. He wasn't a little kid anymore. He was 13, old enough to see, to understand. And as his gaze flickered between me and his mother, something in his expression hardened. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked away. The moment felt heavy. I looked at Vanessa. She looked at Derek. And Derek? Derek laughed. A slow, condescending chuckle as he took another sip of beer, shaking his head like this was some kind of joke. Something inside me snapped. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Relax, man. Kid's just got an attitude." My blood boiled. That kid's my son. In my house. Derek took another sip, unbothered. "Yeah? And?" The audacity, the sheer disrespect, made my vision blur with rage. And then, before I could process what was happening, before I could prepare, he slapped me. It wasn't hard, more like an insulting tap across my cheek, something meant to belittle rather than harm. But it didn't matter. It was a last straw. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Liam had seen. Chloe had peeked from behind the staircase. Even Vanessa looked shocked. Derek, however, just smirked, and then, with a voice so dripping with arrogance that it made my stomach turn, he said the words that finally shattered the illusion. "You're not the man of the house anymore. That's my job now." For a moment, I didn't move. The words hung in the air, venomous, undeniable. And then, I exploded. I lunged. My hands found his collar, shoving him back so hard that he slammed against the wall with a dull thud. The smirk vanished. "You think this is a joke?" My voice was a growl, low and dangerous. "You think you can walk into my house and disrespect me?" Derek's hands came up defensively, but I shoved him again. "This isn't your house. This isn't your family. And you sure as hell aren't the man of anything. His bravado cracked. His cocky expression wavered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Daniel, stop. Vanessa's voice rang out, but I barely heard her. I tightened my grip. You want to be a man, Derek? Then stand like one. He didn't. He squirmed. Okay, I get it. I released him, shoving him one last time. He stumbled, nearly falling. Get out. My voice was cold, final. And if you ever step foot in my house again, you won't walk out. Derek adjusted his shirt, face flushed with humiliation. He turned to Vanessa, like he expected her to say something to defend him. But for once, she was silent. He hesitated, just for a second, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. And for the first time in months, the house was quiet. I turned to Vanessa. Say it. She crossed her arms. Say what? Say you're sorry. She blinked, lips parting slightly, but she didn't speak. And that's when I saw it. Not regret. Not guilt. Just indifference. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Derek was gone, but so was she. I swallowed hard, looked at my children, my son, who had seen everything, my daughter, who was too young to understand but old enough to feel the shift in the air. This wasn't my family anymore. Not really. And that's when I knew it was time to let go. A silence so thick it felt like suffocation filled the living room. The air pulsed with tension, crackling like a storm about to break. Derek's smug grin still lingered in the space between us, his arrogance hanging in the air like a foul stench. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. My face stung from where his hand had struck, but the pain was nothing compared to the fire spreading through my chest. It wasn't just the slap, it was the audacity, the invasion, the sheer, unrelenting disrespect. My kids were watching. My wife was watching. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I lunged. My hands found the collar of Derek's expensive, pretentious button-down, and in one swift motion, I slammed him against the nearest wall. A framed family photo rattled and crashed to the floor, glass shattering at our feet. His smirk vanished, replaced by something raw, something vulnerable. Listen to me, you son of a bitch, I growl, my grip tightening. You think you can walk into my home, put your hands on me, in front of my family? You think I'm just going to stand here and let it happen? Derek's hands came up defensively, his cocky exterior fracturing. Hey man, relax. It was just. I shoved him harder. Say it again. Go ahead. Try me. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. Daniel, stop. Vanessa's voice cut through the fog of rage, sharp and desperate. I ignored her. My focus was on him. I leaned in, my voice dropping to something lower, more lethal. You don't belong here, and you sure as hell don't get to act like you do. Derek squirmed, his hands gripping my wrists, but I didn't let go. You're not the man of this house. You never were, and you never will be. His lip curled, the last remnants of his bravado clawing their way to the surface. You think Vanessa wants you anymore? You think you still have a place here? I could have hit him. I wanted to hit him. But I didn't. Instead, I did something worse. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent a shiver through him. Funny, I said, my grip tightening before I finally released him, stepping back. You thought you were taking something from me, but you don't even realize. I gestured around us, to Vanessa, to my kids still frozen on the couch. There's nothing left to take. Derek stumbled forward, adjusting his shirt, his confidence flickering back like a dying flame. This isn't over, he muttered, his voice weaker now. I took a step toward him, and he flinched. That was all the victory I needed. Get out, I said. And if you ever come near my family again, I won't be this polite. Derek hesitated, his eyes flickering to Vanessa, as if searching for some last scrap of validation. She said nothing. That was his answer. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, emptier. I exhaled, turning to Vanessa. And the look on her face? It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. It was worse. It was nothing. Her eyes held no warmth, no remorse, just a quiet, exhausted indifference. And that was when I knew Derek wasn't the problem. He never had been. The real problem was standing right in front of me. The silence that followed Derek's departure was suffocating. The air still crackled with the remnants of my fury, but it was quickly being replaced by something else, something colder. Finality. Vanessa stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, her face an unreadable mask. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't begging for forgiveness or trying to justify anything. She was just watching me. And in that moment, I knew. She had already let me go. I had spent months drowning in doubt, convincing myself I was paranoid, that I was seeing ghosts where there were none. But ghosts don't touch your wife's arm like that. Ghosts don't laugh with her in the way only you should be able to make her laugh. No, the ghost was me. I had become a shadow in my own home, a relic of something that used to matter. And Vanessa? She had moved on long before tonight. The realization hit harder than Derek ever could. I turned to my kids. Liam's hands were still clenched into fists, his body tense, as if waiting for a signal to fight. Chloe clung to the edge of the couch, her wide eyes darting between Vanessa and me, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that shouldn't exist. They had seen everything. The anger, the fight, the truth. And suddenly, I felt sick. I had let them witness this, the unraveling of their family, the moment their father was challenged in his own home. And the worst part? They had seen their mother do nothing. Liam's voice cut through the quiet. Are we just going to pretend like this is normal? He looked at Vanessa when he said it, not me. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. That was answer enough. Chloe whimpered, burying her face in a throw pillow. I wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but I felt cemented to the floor. The weight of everything held me down, pressing into my chest like an unbearable force. And then Vanessa spoke. I think you should leave, Daniel. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a plea. It was a statement, cold and lifeless, like she was asking me to take out the trash. Liam's head snapped toward her. What? Vanessa exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. We can't keep doing this. We. As if I had been the one who destroyed us. As if I had invited another man into our home, into our marriage. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Because she didn't have to. We both knew she had made her choice long ago. I could have fought for her, for us, but what was left to fight for? Love isn't something you beg for. Respect isn't something you demand. And I refused to stay where I wasn't wanted. I turned to Liam and Chloe. Their faces were a mixture of anger, sadness, and something else, something deeper. Disillusionment. I crouched down in front of them, my throat tightening. Listen to me. My voice came out hoarse, but I forced myself to continue. No matter what happens, I'm always your dad. That doesn't change. Chloe sniffled, nodding. Liam didn't say anything, but the hardness in his eyes softened just a little. I stood up, my gaze locking onto Vanessa's one last time. There was nothing left to say. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked to the door. As I stepped outside, the cold night air wrapped around me, sharp and sobering. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside me. Then, I did something I hadn't done in months. I kept walking. Away from the house. Away from the lies. Away from the ruins of a marriage that had ended long before I was willing to admit. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding on. I was letting go.